A specter is haunting France. The specter of pension reforms. More than 1 million protesters, including garbage collectors, university professors, and other public servants, have made much of France to a halt. Emmanuel Macron, on the other hand, wants to simplify the pension system and increase the pension age to 64 from 62. Despite massive public backlash, President Macron has persisted in not pulling back. And last week, he invoked an article of the Constitution to go on with his pension reforms without a vote of the parliament. Things are heating up. If you want to exactly know what are the reforms, why it has gone so bad, and will it be the political end of Macron, stick to the end of this video. But before that, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for financial updates. Background of the French pension system. To understand why the French pension system remains a politically sensitive issue, you need a bit of historical context. Throughout its history, the French pension system has undergone several reforms implemented by different leaders. During the 1980s, President Mitterrand initiated measures aimed at raising the retirement age from 60 to 65 and promoting the adoption of private pension plans. And since then, every French president has failed to overhaul this. In 1993, President Chirac introduced reforms to reduce the deficit of the pension system, but he had to overturn his decision amid public unrest. 20 years later, Socialist President François Hollande tried his luck and reformed the system by raising the minimum retirement age to 62 for all workers, but by enacting a gradual increase in contributions years required to get a full pension. Then came Macron, who in 2019 proposed changes that would have merged France's 42 different pension schemes into a single universal system that would replace the current system of special retirement plans for certain professions. The French government argued that the changes were necessary to make the system fairer and financially sustainable. This proposal for pension reforms faced significant opposition and triggered widespread protests. However, before any changes could be implemented, the COVID-19 pandemic hit and the government had to shelve the idea for a while. Many assumed that the proposed reforms were abandoned entirely. But during his 2022 presidential campaign, Macron revived the topic and pledged to push for pension reform once again, calling for increasing the minimum retirement age from 62 to 64. Present discords. And this leads us to today. Currently, the French government has put forth a proposal to raise the minimum retirement age from 62 to 64. Along with this change, it also aims to extend the number of years required to qualify for a full pension to 43 years. The implementation of these reforms would occur gradually, with the new retirement age taking effect in 2030 and the required number of years being extended by 2027. In a bid to simplify the pension system, the French government is also proposing to put an end to special regimes with different retirement ages for various professions such as railway, electricity, and gas workers. However, certain professions like the police and fire brigade, whose jobs are deemed strenuous, will continue to enjoy a lower retirement age. To make things fairer, the government has also promised to increase the guaranteed minimum pension for lower income workers to a whopping 85% of the minimum wage. Looks like the government wants to ensure that you won't have to rob a bank to retire comfortably. Now that we know what the government is aiming for, it's time to address some genuine concerns raised by the public. But before we dive into those, let's briefly explore the reasoning behind the government's push for pension reform. And another reminder to subscribe to the channel for more such compelling stories. Government's stance. Macron's main argument for the pension reform is money, and he has cited a report by a government-mandated expert committee to back his case. According to the report, pension payments are projected to reach up to 14.7% of GDP by 2032, as compared to the current figure of 13.8%. Philippe Crevel, an economist and head of the Paris-based think tank Cercle de l'Épargne, shares Macron's views. Crevel believes that this reform is crucial to foster economic growth by encouraging more people to enter the workforce. He pointed out that France has a relatively low employment rate among older people compared to other countries, and increasing the minimum pension would help boost this rate. In other words, this reform isn't just about balancing the books, it's also about creating a more robust and sustainable economy for the future. Macron also thinks that the government needs to allocate resources toward increasing the defense needs of the country, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But the public is in no mood to hear Macron. And here's why. No to reforms. the French voice. The proposed pension reforms have been met with objections from some French economists who interestingly have used the same report the government has cited to support their case. The report notes that the decision to reform the pension system is a political one and not an obligation, and that increased spending is not guaranteed if reforms are not implemented. One economist, Michael Zemmour from Paris, one Panthéon-Sorbonne University, believes that the government's motives are not entirely straightforward. He argues that the previous reforms have already made the pension system healthy and that the government's real intention is to balance the budget and offset tax rebates for companies. According to him, the government is slowly dismantling the social model. Another economist, Henry Sturdiniak, from a left-wing Paris-based think tank, has expressed concern that the proposed reforms would disproportionately affect the working class. He notes that while those with university degrees would have to work beyond the minimum retirement age to receive a full pension, those who entered the workforce early and have already accumulated the necessary years of work by age 62 would be negatively impacted. The situation has now escalated with widespread opposition to the reforms from 2/3 of the French population, as well as the 8 most prominent unions who have joined forces to exert pressure on the government to scrap the proposed changes. It's not just a typical strike. It's important to keep in mind that labor unions in France hold significant power and can mobilize large movements and disrupt the supply of common goods and commodities. For example, the CGT and FO, which are powerful within the transport and energy sector, have called for further resistance against these proposed reforms. And now it appears that President Macron has shot himself in the foot by going with the pension bill by invoking Article 49.3 of the French Constitution and bypassing the vote in the parliament. With Macron's party losing the majority in the parliament last year, and both the far right and socialist left opposing the pension policy, it was a risky move, and it seems to have ignited a firestorm of opposition. On March 16th, Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne triggered Article 49.3 to force the bill through without a vote, which only intensified the opposition's protests. They even sang the national anthem in protest. Now, Article 49.3 of the French Constitution limits the ability of the opposition to block legislation proposed by the government. It allows the Prime Minister to push a bill through the National Assembly without a parliamentary vote, effectively forcing it into law. In response, the opposition can call for a vote of no confidence against the government, which could potentially lead to new elections. This is exactly what the French opposition did. They called for a no confidence motion, but Macron has been able to narrowly survive it by just 9 votes. Things are looking messy for the French government. More and more people joined by powerful trade unions have come to the forefront. Macron's pension reforms have created a lot of chaos in France, perhaps the biggest one since the French Revolution. The streets of France have once again been set ablaze as protesters take to the streets to demand their voices be heard on the proposed pension reforms. This is not the first time that such a scenario has unfolded in France. The government believes that it is necessary to cut spending, but the people of France feel that they are being left at a disadvantage. The government needs to recognize the will of the majority and act more democratically. Failure to do so could result in further unrest and turmoil. The world watches with bated breath, hoping for a peaceful resolution to this tumultuous situation. If you like our content, do subscribe to the channel for more updates, and do let me know your thoughts on the French pension reforms.